Welcome, everyone. I am Kristen Sargent, Chevy Chase at Home's Member and Volunteer Programs Manager. As many of you may know, Chevy Chase at Home engages adults 55 and older in social and educational programming, both in person and virtually, as we are here today. We also provide volunteer services to older adults who need assistance to remain at home, including rides, technical support, and minor household chores. We are so glad to have you join us this afternoon for our speaker series. Deborah Scheck, who is a member of Chevy Chase at Home's Board of Directors and chair of our guest speaker committee, is going to introduce our speaker, Lyric Winik, and moderate today's talk. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Deborah. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deborah Scheck, and as Kristen said, I'm on the board of Chevy Chase at Home, and I'll be introducing today's speaker. She'll speak for a bit, and we'd really like it to be interactive. So do put any questions that come to mind as she's speaking into the chat function, and as you think of them, and we'll try to have her answer as many as possible during the hour time frame. So for the past few years, I have known our speaker, Lyric Winik, as a very dedicated and skilled PTSA President for BCC High School. And she just seems to take care of everything and do so much for the school. Over the years, I've remarked about how skillfully she communicates with parents, teachers, and administration. I recently learned why she's so adept at crafting even the most sensitive emails to the community. It's because she's also a very well-respected and talented professional writer. The Washington Post called her the go-to scribe for political memoirs, and New York Times reporter Marian Burroughs described her as a gifted crafter of sentences. An award-winning writer and author, Lyric Winik has worked with Laura Bush on her memoir, Secrets of the Heart, and with Michelle Obama on the White House book, American Grown. Both of these made it to the New York Times bestseller list. In the last decade, Lyric has collaborated on more than 15 books, including the groundbreaking Daring to Drive, A Saudi Woman's Awakening, and in 2021, the book How to Be Human, an Autistic Man's Guide to Life, which was described by Walter Isaacson as a beautiful and astonishing book. This book also reached #1 on Amazon within days of its release. For her most recent project, she worked with NPR legend Nina Totenberg on Dinners with Ruth, a memoir of friendship. In this talk, Lyric will take us behind the scenes of her book collaborations with First Ladies Laura Bush, Michelle Obama, NPR's Nina Totenberg, and others to explain how she's able to capture another person's essence and translate their voice and memories onto the page. Lyric, take it away.
Great, thanks, Deborah. I see there are a bunch of people in the waiting room, so I don't know if somebody can admit them. I don't want to make a mistake and not do it and throw them out. Thanks. So I'm really, really happy to be here, and thank you. Yeah, I guess that maybe there should be like a little asterisk when you get voted in, when you run unopposed to become PTSA president, that says, please have a communications background in your in the rest of your life, because it'll make the job much easier. But yes, I do have a day job, and I'll tell you about it because, you know, most people are book readers or aspirational memoirists or all kinds of things like that. And I'm happy to talk about all of that. I really kind of fell into my current career. It wasn't something like, if you had, you know, asked me what I was going to do when I grow up, this would not have been my statement of choice. You're going to get little glimpses of my dog of Zoom who's moving around. But I actually started out and spent a number of years as a magazine journalist, and I profiled a lot of people in Washington. And so basically what happened in part was that in 2009, in January, I got a call asking if I would be willing to have my name put on a list and send up a bio, because a group of possible writers was being collected for departing First Lady Laura Bush's memoir collaborator. And I was like, yeah, sure, that's fine. Sounds good to me. And I never thought it would go anywhere. I was basically told, we want to put your name on the list because you've profiled her. I had actually interviewed her every year that she had been in the White House. And they said, well, at least she'll recognize your name. And I was like, okay. So it turns out that name recognition actually is a really good thing because she bumped me to the list of finalists. And, this was not what I did for a job. And the publisher actually really wanted her to pick the woman who had worked with Cherie Blair, who was the wife of British Prime Minister Tony Blair, and was kind of horrified that I made the finals and decided to put me first for like a 9 a.m. meeting and thinking, well, we can just knock this one off and then move on to the, the writers that we would prefer. And it turned out that Mrs. Bush picked me to write her book. And then the publisher was despondent, Scribner in New York, because they're like, oh my goodness, we've, paid a large sum of money for this book. And, that's the end. And they didn't even put it in the book catalog. And it actually turned out to be a fairly good thing for everybody because the book actually did really, really well. It was lovely for me to work with Mrs. Bush. And it was the most successful memoir when it was released in, let's see, what it would have been 2010. And so anyway, that was how I got started in this. And I was very fortunate because the work followed after that. And I just kept doing more and more of these books. And I discovered I really liked it. I also liked it for a very unusual reason, I think. It's a very collaborative process. It's exactly what it sounds like when you are a book collaborator. It's not adversarial. And there is something about journalism. When you're interviewing people, you're trying to get them to say something that maybe they're not totally comfortable saying, and you're trying to get them to make news, and they may not really want to do that. And so there's something where you're trying to get them to behave in one way or another that they don't want to. And that makes an inherent amount of tension in whatever is going on. So I am going to let my dog who is now unhappy. Go on, go. All right. So anyway, it makes it for a tension-filled situation. And when you're working with someone on a book, you actually don't have that because you are working together. Your goal is the same. They may tell you things that they don't ultimately want to end up in the book, and that's okay. I have developed over the years a big vault of secrets. I've signed well, how many books have I done? I've done 18 books, so I probably signed about 19 NDAs, maybe more than that. So you end up really holding people's secrets. And there are some things I can tell you, like there are things that I have had various clients tell me around abuse issues or horrible things that have happened with their childhood that, in some cases, I'm the only person they've told, and that you end up holding these things. If they don't want them in the book, they just stay with you for the rest of your life, and you're the custodian of them, and you do not share them. So I was really fortunate to get started with Mrs. Bush's book. And it's interesting that I think one of the things that I discovered in that process that's really important to consider, whether you're a reader or an aspiring writer, is it's vital to hear what someone's story is. And I like to think that maybe that's what I'm able to do, is to cut through and hear the rhythms of a story. And the best example I can give of that is that actually the editor for the book, who's a very, very well-respected editor in New York, legendary woman named Nan Graham, had this idea that, Mrs. Bush had mentioned that first ladies aren't really allowed, or when she was there, were not allowed to carry pocketbooks, purses. And so she spent the whole time, never having a purse with her. You're an aide or someone, a personal assistant, has to carry it, but you can't have it on your person. And when she was getting ready to be out of the White House, her daughters gave her a purse. And so the editor thought, well, that's how we should start the book. And I spent a lot of time with Mrs. Bush back in West Texas, in Midland, where she grew up, and talking to her about her life. And she shared with me something that nobody else, in fact, she had not talked about publicly, and other people outside her family really didn't know. She's an only child, as I think most of you would know, but she actually had 4 brothers and sisters who were born and did not survive. And her very first memory as a little girl is of looking at this glass in this little tiny Western clinic in Midland, Texas. And inside in a little incubator is her brother, who will only live for 2 days. And I just thought that was such a poignant and powerful image. And that is, in fact, where I started the book. And much of the book is focused on her time in Midland and growing up in Texas right after World War II and through young adulthood and all of that. And it offered a really different look. And that's kind of the goal for what you want to do in these types of projects. You want to bring somebody's life to light in a way that, the public doesn't expect, and that might showcase them in a different way and really tells their story. I think that, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with doing these types of projects, because you really do, it's a little bit like holding someone's heart in your hands, because they are sharing a lot of things with you, and they are really opening up their life for you to take a look and to treat with a lot of care. And I think that that's probably the most important thing that you can do. So it's sort of interesting, just to quickly pivot to the other, I'm very fortunate to have worked with 2 first ladies. I think I'm the only writer to actually have done that, and 2 consecutive first ladies, which is also unusual. But when she was in the White House, Michelle Obama was approached about doing a book on the White House kitchen garden and larger issues around, gardens, food, health, all of those things. And so I was very fortunate. She picked me. It was sort of, Mrs. Bush said, well, it's like you're going to the dance with someone else. And I said, yes, I guess I am. But I spent a lot of time there and there at the White House. And lest you think that this is a very glamorous job, there are a lot of photos in this book. And they set up the photo shoots sort of without necessarily a big amount of thought. We had in fact, the photographer who does the photos for Ina Garten's cookbooks. So every one of Ina Garten's cookbooks had this Quentin Bacon, this photographer. So they decided to do one of the main garden photo shoots on Memorial Day. And the National Park Service obviously helps care for the garden, and they're off on Memorial Day. So, and it was 96 degrees. So I had to show up for the photo shoot. I ended up becoming the de facto stylist as well as the writer, because the publisher had not hired a stylist. And I'm standing out there watering the wilted plants and pulling like some stray weeds and doing things like that, and basically absolutely covered like a full-fledged gardener so we could pull off this photo shoot. And so there are various things like that. When we shot the cover for Mrs. Obama's book, because of the way the vegetables were growing in the garden and the need to keep them in there for the harvest, with which was always done by different elementary school children around Washington, D.C., they asked us not to pick any of the vegetables because you need a really wide array for a photo shoot. So I actually had to go buy vegetables at the farm market. And for those of you who live in this area, if you're aware of the little Section 3 farm market on Taylor Street, it's by New Morning Farm. Well, Jim Crawford, who owned New Morning Farm, was the farm consultant for the White House Kitchen Garden. So he had helped them set it up. So I went to meet up with Jim at his other market at Sheridan School. And I filled a rolling suitcase and multiple LL Bean canvas bags with eggplant, okra, sweet potatoes, carrots. I mean, basically everything from the farm. and I had to transport those vegetables downtown. And then I had to transport those vegetables into the White House, which entailed walking with a lot of vegetables. I do not think the Secret Service and the Secret Service dogs have ever sniffed so many vegetables in their lives. But anyway, I got them through the checkpoint, and then I had to roll and walk everything down the hill to the garden and lay it out and all of that. And so those are some of the perks, I guess, that come with the job. And if you look at the cover of that book, American Grown, those are all Jim Crawford's vegetables, and they look gorgeous. And thankfully, the National Park Service employees took them home, so I didn't have to drag them back up the very long hill at the White House. So those are, those are some of the things that go into writing life that, you probably wouldn't think about. And the third thing really that I just feel very fortunate about, and that I think, is helpful if you're a reader to consider, is just the wide variety of stories that are out there. I mean, I have done some books that are, with political figures, but I don't prefer to do politics books. I'm really interested in their private lives. I'm glad we're sort of moving away from the political biographies a little bit, because some of them are kind of boring. But people's private lives and, their childhoods, how they've grown up, how they see themselves, their family stories, those are the things that are really interesting and tell us a lot about someone. And, that can be true whether they're here or all over the world. I was very fortunate to work with a woman named Manal al-Sharif, who is a Saudi woman who was arrested and jailed for driving. And her protest to allow women to drive in Saudi Arabia today, they can drive. And you really see how something like that, it actually, the edict was lifted, the edict forbidding driving was lifted not long after her book came out. So one small thing can have an enormous consequence, and setting it down on paper where everybody can read it has an even bigger consequence. So there's actually, there's a lot that happens with books, and it's a pleasure to be a part of them. So I don't know if we have questions, or Deborah, you want to turn to some questions and I can tell some more stories. I know that, monologues on Zoom are a long thing.
Yeah, I would encourage people to put questions in the chat. In the meantime, I'll ask a few questions that have come to mind.
Sure.
So what is your process like? I mean, in terms of, do the people who are writing the book write any kind of draft, or are they writing at all? Or are you just talking to them and you're really the writer and you try to grasp their voice in your writing?
So honestly, it is different in every single book. They're different, and I will say this, you can have an amazing story, but, not everybody is a writer by training, profession, background, and quite frankly, even for people who are professional writers, books are a different animal. In the same way that I'm not sure I couldn't sit down and write a screenplay. Like, I've never done it. I'd really have to try to teach myself how to do it. And I don't know that I'd be very good at it. Books are hard. They often are really hard for journalists, because journalists are used to putting out things in a tight word limit and telling their whole story arc in a small article, and trying to stretch that from, something where 2,000 words is extremely long over a story arc of 80,000 words can be really difficult. But sometimes I get questions, I get drafts from people and I will rework them. And then sometimes it's really a process from scratch where I interview the person, spend a lot of time talking to them about various things, put together their story, and then go over it with them. And you can do that in a variety of ways. They can read it and send back comments. There's sometimes where, I've read the story aloud with the client and we've worked on it that way. Some clients are big editors and some clients are just like, give me the draft and let me check the box and we'll be fine. It's very, very individual. There is one thing that I have really started doing actually with many of the people that I work with, which is I will do research about certain aspects, maybe places that they've lived or, time periods, things like that. But I've actually stopped reading a lot of the media coverage around the clients, because I want to come to it just hearing them and not having the noise of how anybody else has portrayed them or envisioned them or what they've seen. And then I will go back and look at it in the end in the editing phase to see if there are things that need to be addressed. But there's a lot to coming to someone as a blank slate and letting them just walk through their story and hear their story unencumbered, unfettered.
That's interesting. We have someone who's asked, what advice do you have for someone who wants to write her own memoir?
I love getting that question. First of all, there are a couple of things I would say, which one would just be start. Like you can edit anything except a blank page. Someone else can edit anything except a blank page. So that's helpful. I would say two other things that I think are really helpful. Don't necessarily conceive of a memoir as being chronological. In fact, I personally have found more and more, I kind of go more towards thematic memoirs where it's loosely chronological, but I want to deal with specific themes. And what this saves you from is having to mention everything. Like, maybe your college years were the most exciting years of your life. Great. Then they need a big chapter, or several big chapters. But maybe you spent most of that time in the library. We do not need to know that you were in, study Carol D21 from 7:55 until 11:55, and that, you had 15 books in front of you like that. You don't need to worry about that. You can just hit the high points and skip over the other stuff. And finally, what is often really helpful for people to bring back memories, some of us have saved cards and letters, and that is great. Photographs really help. I've often found going through photos with my clients has brought back a lot of memories and been really, really interesting and useful for them. So if you're looking for something to sometimes the photos that you've saved, how you've organized them, that can be its own little roadmap to putting something down. And, whether you just write it for yourself as a reflection, whether it's something you want to write for your family, all of that kind of stuff. There's a lot of value in it, and you tend to see things a little differently once you've done it too. It's a nice reflection process. It's more elaborate than keeping a diary, but you're looking back through a lot of stuff, and it takes on different meaning when you do it that way.
So someone in the chat is asking questions about how you're compensated, like whether you get a flat fee or it's by the hour or a day or a percentage of profits, or is each deal different?
Each deal is different. How about this? They always pay, writers are the most crucial thing, and there's not a lot different between Hollywood and book publishing. They're like they want to pay the writer the least, but you wouldn't have a book and you wouldn't have a movie without them. So that's kind of it. Every deal is different. If I actually costed it out for the hours put in and divided it up, I think I might break minimum wage. I might not. But most of the time, the way it's organized is with a flat fee that's payable in installments. You have to be able to deliver the book. Book has to be accepted, has to be published. There's a very long time horizon. You have to be, I guess, a very good money manager, because publishers are also very notorious at being slow. I can deliver a manuscript and I can wait 2 to 3 months to be paid, which I'll tell you is frustrating. And royalties. Again, you do sometimes get what's referred to back end. It would be a portion of whatever the book earns out again, like the movies, a lot of books do not earn out. So you want to be really careful how you've structured that deal. It's sometimes better to take the money and run, as it were, and then hold on to the hope that you're going to get rich off of back end. Publishers have a lot of accounting tricks, and it's expensive to put out a book. So they're not necessarily high earners, even the super successful ones.
And how does it feel to produce or co-produce a creative work like a book and have it mostly attributed to the person who the book is about?
You know, I actually don't mind that at all. I'm not, I mean, you know, like, I guess, how can I put it? When I worked on Mrs. Bush's book, I think that the perfect comment for me is one day one of my friends called me up and said, you know what, I just heard that someone said, oh, a mom from Somerset Elementary did that book. And I think that's kind of like the perfect description of me. So I'm thankful I don't have to go on a book tour. If I produce a great book that everybody loves and loves to read, I have done my job. And I don't need to worry. I mean, I help with the marketing, but it is not dependent on me. And it's, you know, so it's not reflected. It doesn't reflect negatively on me. And I'm not that, I don't really like the spotlight. I'm happy to hang out in the acknowledgements. And part of the thing that I really enjoy about this is the process. I like the people I work with in publishing. I like having the ability to help people with a great story tell that story. I mean, there is something really, really rewarding about that, and seeing seeing that come alive on the page. And the book would not be a book without their story. So, you know, in that regard, if you look at it in that light, there's no need to, you know, to, like, it's a good thing. I actually, a longtime editor of mine when I was in journalism, he actually worked at the same publication, had a wonderful phrase. He said, I like to dance, and this is true for editors, especially working with writers. I like to dance in the spotlight of others. And I think that sums it up really well. If you are a person who is very happy having the spotlight fall on others, then this is a great book for you, and a great, you know, sort of career project or whatever for you.
Do you have a favorite project, and why was it your favorite?
Well, they're sort of, I mean, books are a little like your children. You're never supposed to have a favorite, but I guess, you know, there are probably a few that you're happier to see go off to college than there's, although in my case, I love both my kids equally, and I'm very happy when they're here, home, or whatever. But there is one book that's really special to me, and actually is the only one that has my name, or it's one of two that has my name on the cover. And it's called How to Be Human: An Autistic Man's Guide to Life. It's a book I did with the first diagnosed autistic Rhodes Scholar, and it really walks you through, it's a dialogue between the two of us, and then I frame our conversations, and it walks you through how he thinks, his views on emotions, his views on all kinds of things, education, communicating with other people, being, you know, being non-neurotypical. And I think it's just such a special book, and that he's so wise and sees so many things about the rest of us from his vantage point. And it was a true pleasure to work with him on that. And I just, that book always will have a special place in my heart.
Yeah, I know that there are a lot more, TV shows showing autistic people in a very positive light, and showing what gifts they give and everything. And just in recent years, and it's sort of makes you feel a similar way. So you mentioned, someone in the chat says, you mentioned that the publisher of Mrs. Bush's book was less than enthusiastic at first about about your being chosen. I would imagine that publishers' attitudes have changed after your success, but can you comment on that?
Yeah, no, it's true. And actually, sometimes I'm a selling point for our project now, which is kind of funny considering where I started. But yeah, and I'm really fortunate. I do a lot of work with Simon and Schuster, and that would pretty much keep me, like they keep me busy all the time. And I have a great relationship working with a number of their editors there and really, really enjoy it. So I feel fortunate. But, look, you're only as good as your last book. You're proving this is the same in any profession. You're proving yourself all the time. Every project I start, I have to feel a little nervous because I have to produce. Like it's got to be held to a really high standard, and I hold myself to a really high standard. So, it's nice, but I can't go hire my own ghostwriter to do my job. So, you just have to always be committed to bringing your best, basically every day.
And do you ever get writer's block, or what do you do if you get it?
I answer email, and I'm actually really not kidding. I don't get writer's block that much because I have deadlines and I have to meet, and book production is a very unforgiving process. So where you are slotted in, you have to fulfill those duties, and just like any other contract, anything. But I actually do find other ways around it. Sometimes I do small consulting projects, so I might edit something up just to sort of reset my brain. I do answer emails. Those of you on the receiving end of my emails probably are like, oh my God, that's why they're so long. I guess they might be my procrastination part. Sometimes I go for a walk with my dog, do something like that, and read a little bit. But I'm pretty determined every day to set down a certain number of words, and just with the idea that I can go back and fix it. It is a job, and I don't have the luxury. I can't call up Simon and Schuster and say, yeah, I've been a little blocked for the last month and I'm kind of sorry, but we're going to have to delay that. It's like, no, you're just going to do it. So
in some ways it must be helpful that you're working off someone else's material. It's not like you're coming up with everything out of your own head, that there are stories that are given to you, hopefully, that you're then trying to translate.
It is. The puzzle pieces on that really are how you present them, like how you organize them, how you go through them, what you've structured them. There is a fair amount of thinking involved in it, and also making sure, you get into a story and sometimes you realize, oh, I really need to go find some more material about this, or this will not be that clear. In a couple of cases, I've actually had incidents where there have been, I guess what you could say is like family lore that's been handed down, like people were absolutely certain about X or Y story. And when I've researched it to double check the locations and the names and all of these other things, and then the deeper I dug, I realized like, there's no way this happened. I mean, this person just made up what they told you. It was a complete fabrication. And that's actually very hard to tell someone, to say, like what your dad told you, it wasn't true. Here's all this documentation I found, and I'm really sorry about it. But what they maintained they didn't do. And so, there's a lot of other work that goes into it. I did a book. The first book I ever did was actually with a Holocaust survivor, who had fled. He was born in Poland, and he fled into the Soviet Union when the Germans attacked. And he ended up being sent to a labor camp in Siberia, escaping, joining the Polish and Russian army that made its way eventually to Berlin. And, so he's recounting all of this from memory. And I wanted to verify, and I was in my 20s, I wanted to verify how he had, my early 20s, how he had done all this. And There were two things. The New York Public Library has some of the German targeting maps from World War II, and you can see where they went and the order that they went in. And I was able to find his very small town in Poland and where it was, and the full targeting map complement. And then actually for when he was fighting his way back and discovering what happened to his family, pushing forward with the Russian army, there were a series of, he remembered very strongly the weather conditions. He was driving a truck, and weather was like, he was really able to talk about each area he was and what the weather was like. And it turns out that West Point had developed in the late 40s, early 50s, a series of manuals that depicted the war on the Russian side of the war against Nazi Germany. And they were very detailed in the weather conditions. And I was able to match up everything that he was telling me with these weather conditions in these manuals and chart independently where he had been. So there's a lot of stuff like that you wouldn't necessarily anticipate. And it is a kind of, whole voyage of discovery, basically.
Wow, that's interesting. So people are still concerned about you getting the acknowledgement that you deserve. Is there a typical way, like for these high profile books, for you to get, like, are you just mentioned in the acknowledgements typically, or what's the best way that?
No, I mentioned in the acknowledgements, years ago, they used to put on the cover, and I guess they still do with sports stars, because sort of the assumption is that they're not necessarily going to have written a book. They used to put with, and the name of the writer, but publishers realized that didn't help them with marketing strategies. And so they really wanted it to just have the, notable person or whomever on the cover. And truly, like, I'm fine with it, but I'm usually reasonably high up in the acknowledgements, and it's kind of clear that I contributed something. And at the end of the day, the people I work with in the industry kind of know what I did, and I know what I did, and my kids know what I did because they've lived through each book. So I'm really fine. Like, this is a perfect career for me, because although I don't necessarily seem this way in my BCC life, I'm actually a relatively shy person. I don't like a lot of attention. I just would prefer to go about my life without a lot of focus. And so it's kind of, I get to work with really interesting people, and nobody pays attention to me. And that to me is ideal.
Yeah. So just going back to the process a little bit, I'm really interested in how you capture someone's voice, because each book needs to come off as, the voice of the person, who it's about. And what are your techniques for really understanding how they would think and talk and express themselves?
No, that's great. And it's a really, really wide range of people too. And it's men, it's women. I mean, it's people who are older, people who are younger, it's all kinds of things like that. So interviewing people really, really helps, because you definitely hear the way that they talk. There is something about it where you dial in to who they are. I mean, it sounds crazy to say, it doesn't sound good, but they do kind of live rent free in my head. And once you kind of get into the rhythm of the book, it definitely sounds like them. The biggest test is when they read the book themselves, and it's usually pretty seamless. And so you can hear them doing it. I guess I usually know I've succeeded when I make a client cry, when they read their story on the page and they're like, I broke down crying at this part. And so that that it has resonated with them, and they can hear themselves saying it. I'm not totally sure. I think that it's just something that inherently I just don't tune in to how people express themselves and what they say. I will say alternatively, I have a couple of friends who are like, yeah, I could always tell it's your book because there's a little piece of you in it. And I think that's fair. It's probably, undeniable. I've had a couple of clients where the editors have asked for more reflection on their life. And the response has been, yeah, I'm done with that. I'm not reflecting. And so I have been, okay, if I were this person and if I were reflecting on their life, what might I say here? And so I sort of supply the reflections, but as long as everybody, including the client, is okay with it, it seems to work out. And it's interesting because you really develop a very wide appreciation for different perspectives of lots of different people. And that is a great thing. So nobody loses in that.
And especially with these high profile people who don't have a lot of time, let's say you make up or not make up, but for your best guess of a reflection or whatever, what's the process for you sort of getting there? Okay. Does that go through the editors, or are you saying hey, I wrote this thing, can you look it over?
Oh, no, I'll go directly to them and put it in and say, this is this is what I've done. I might even flag it on the page for them. And I'm like, please change it if it doesn't feel right or whatever. And usually it's pretty close. I mean, that's the thing. You really do get in sync with these people, and you kind of understand where they are and where they're coming from. So that part is good. And I mean, it's not like I'm doing that all the time, but sometimes I might be able to put into words something that they had sort of intuitively thought, but didn't articulate. And that's also part of it. That's also what a great speechwriter does. There's a certain skill that comes with that.
Someone in the chat, this kind of follows on to that, asked if any of the clients tend to become friends, or do you maintain relationships with them, or is it more of a professional thing where you collaborate and then it's kind of over?
Again, it really, really, really depends on the person. I have maintained, and how busy they are and sort of the season of life that you come into someone with. I would say that, in every case, I haven't had anybody where we got to the end of the book and the relationship fell apart, with the exception of a book that I was brought in on an emergency basis to fix because it was not publishable. And the writer was not happy about that, but then I was brought in by the publishing house. So I don't blame him. I probably wouldn't have been happy either. But yeah, in general, I mean, but there are some people who I would really call good friends and who I continue to do, I also continue sometimes to do various work for them, but you do meet some really, really lovely people and, kind of people that you would like to stay friends with. I did, of all things, I did a book on social media, that reworked a book on social media for Greta Van Susteren, the journalist. And she is absolutely lovely. She called, we still chat all the time. I mean, I had an incident where one of my parents was in the hospital and she texted me about something and I'm like, oh, just give me, and 10 seconds later, my phone is ringing. What can I do for you? How are you? All of that sort of stuff. She's been on the edge of her seat with my kids and their college applications and is always following up on that. And so yes, you're fortunate because people in a great way and you can really appreciate them. So, you don't see them with the same intensity. I guess it's kind of like if you have a building a contractor, you renovate your house, and if it goes really well, you're always happy to hear from and see the contractor again. And that maybe is a little bit like me. I mean, might come back in for a touch up on something, but yeah, no, they're definitely, and a lot of people that I'm just feel very fortunate to have gotten to know.
Someone in the chat is asking if you know how ghostwriting began, and did it take time to gain acceptance socially and as a business? This is from someone who has an academic background and knows how meticulous people are about attributing authorship.
So honestly, in some ways, I don't know that it's really gained acceptance. It's just been part of the process. And I don't really, I'm not sure that people have really done much with attribution, and there's a lot of, there's a lot of gray in the whole area. It's kind of funny because when I sign publishing contracts, it refers to the author whose name is on the book, and I'm called the writer. And that's basically that's the sort of universal declaration of how that goes. But I think if you wanted to go back historically, I mean, I'm not going to go quite back to like ancient Greece or Rome, but the first person to kind of have a ghostwriter actually, although he didn't survive his own voyage, but it sort of begins with Ferdinand Magellan. He did not chronicle his trip around the world. He actually didn't survive it, but the person who did and who gives voice to Magellan, quite literally, is this man named Antonio Pigafetta. And and his manuscripts are actually in Yale's library. But I think in some ways there's an argument to be made that he's sort of the first modern ghostwriter. And he is visible. You do know about him, but he really showcased Magellan and was the chronicler of that, and really tried to capture what Magellan was thinking, doing, etc.
That's interesting. So there are a couple questions about how much time you typically have to work on a book, and I would imagine each project is different, but maybe you can give us an idea of what that time
well, the joys of publishing is that the production process is afforded often more time, like the part going through copy edits and page proofs and those things, and design and layout, than the writers get to produce all those words. But it really depends. Generally, you have about a year from signing the contract to delivery. It can fluctuate depending on what's going on. Sometimes you have less because they're trying to peg a book to a specific date. So I'll give you my earliest and my last example. For Mrs. Bush's book, they wanted to have it out for Mother's Day of 2010, which meant releasing it in April of 2010. I couldn't start working on it until April of 2009. So I had to deliver a finished like 85,000 word manuscript ready to hit the press, basically to go into the full production mode. I believe they wanted January 10th, and I said, give me till January 20th. And I literally hit send on like right before I boarded the plane on January 20th to fly back from Dallas with the whole thing done. And then, it went to press for the book printing in March and was out in April. For Nina Totenberg's Dinners with Ruth, it was basically actually the same timeline. We started in May, and the manuscript had to go into production. It was made worse because of COVID. Production is much longer, even now with the COVID hangover. So it had to go into production in January. And so I had to have like the draft done in 6 months. And so, sometimes the time is really tight, and you just learn to accommodate that and write fast.
There's a question in the chat about, have electronic books, Kindle, Audible, etc., changed your work in any way?
That's really interesting. What's changed my work? Twitter. The way I would write a book in 2009, 10, 11 is not the way I would write a book now. It has killed people's attention spans. If you notice, in most of the books that you buy, the chapters have gotten a lot shorter. Some of that also has to do with the rise of Audible and reading the books, but people do not have the patience for long chapters, sections, things like that. In the same way, when you watch a movie from the 1980s and you're like, oh my God, the credits in the beginning, they take forever. The same thing has happened to books. And I really have found that since about 2015, 16, and definitely after that, my writing style and how I present information has dramatically changed. And even if you're not on Twitter, it's kind of the Twitterification of everyone's attention span.
Does that make you sad at all? Like being a literary person?
It does up to a point, but it does also make you, it makes things lean, I guess, and you strip away a lot of the excess. So it does make writing very clean, and it forces you not to be cluttered, and it forces you to really think about things. I think where I am sort of sad about it is the kind of more beautiful, longer setup descriptions, the kind of rhythm of language that you could do in, 15 years, 10, 15 years ago have fallen by the wayside now. It's much harder to do those, particularly in nonfiction. I think there's some room in fiction, but it can be a challenge in nonfiction. It has to be very specific. So yeah. I mean, there are parts about it, there are parts about it that do make me sad. And I know there's some books like I couldn't write the way I had done them at the time.
So do you have any interesting projects on the horizon that you can mention?
I'm finishing off a family saga right now. And then one of my other projects that I need to turn to rapidly is actually a book that it got held up because he was not free. He was still working and had not retired yet. But I am actually doing a memoir with the lead FBI interrogator for Saddam Hussein, and who spent many months with Saddam, not only interrogating him, but in just taking him, like Saddam was at the doctor every day. And so this man, George Piro, was the translator for that. He came to the US as about a middle school age boy from Lebanon as a refugee, not speaking any English, and rose to this really interesting job and position. And it's been fascinating for me to do the research for that and take a look back, through this lens of time. It's hard to imagine that it's 20 years ago, through the issues around the Iraq War and Saddam and all of that. So I'm looking forward to really diving in more to that book. It's a kind of, it's a fascinating story and has a lot of historical merit.
Okay, well, we'll all look for that. And I would encourage people to look up Lyric's other books that are mentioned in her bio. And I'll turn it over back to Kristen to wrap things up.
All right.
Thank you, Lyric.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Lyric, and thank you, Deborah, and thanks to all of you for joining Chevy Chase at Home today for our speaker series. I invite you to explore other programming listed on our website and to consider joining your local village as a member or volunteer. Thanks again. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Take care.